North Carolina.
And you presently live in Southington, Connecticut?
Yes.
And which war did you serve?
Well, I was commissioned the very last day to be classified as a Korean veteran. So I am listed as a Korean veteran. And I was in during the Vietnam War. Total of 21 years service.
What branch of the service were you in?
U.S. Navy.
And what was your highest rank?
Lieutenant Commander, 04.
In what general locations did you serve?
During the 21 years, I served went through midshipman training in the Atlantic. I was in aircraft carriers in the Pacific, and I also served in the East Coast in the Atlantic Fleet. So I was in both the Atlantic and Pacific fleets.
Hank, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I received an NROTC scholarship to college at Duke University, which paid my college expenses and committed me to serve when I graduated in January 1955.
While you were in Duke, can you just give me a little background what your ROTC training was like?
Okay, yes. It started out in 1951. We were midshipman training there all the years I was in college. And in the summer, we did our midshipman cruises, which I could tell you about the 3 summers during my 4 years in college. The cruises were, the first summer I served on the USS Missouri battleship. The second summer, between my sophomore and junior years, I served in Air Force and amphibious operations in the U.S. East Coast. And the last summer before I graduated, I was on a heavy cruiser, the USS Des Moines. Our cruises were in the Atlantic and the Scandinavian area and Europe and Cuba.
As a midshipman, what were your duties?
Well, as a first midshipman, my first cruise are just exactly the same duties as a seaman recruit. I mean, we did everything from holystone the decks to polish bright work to we served 1/3 of the crews in the engineering department below decks, 1/3 in the deck department, and 1/3 in navigation. So the idea was during those summer cruises to get a full picture of what happens in the ship's crew.
Now, I know you told me off camera, on the USS Missouri, you actually polished the plaque?
I sure did. Right on the 01 level where the peace treaty with Japan was signed in Tokyo Bay. One of my jobs one summer as a seaman, as a recruit, was polish that brass plaque in the deck. Yep, I sure did.
Now, once you graduated from college, how long a commitment did you have to serve for the Navy?
Back at that time, we were only obligated for 2 years. An interesting thing about midshipman cruises, we were actually sailors. We wore the same uniform as sailors, except instead of the white hat, we had a little blue rim around the hat at the top, which made us a little different than the ship's company. And I'll tell you a little joke about that. The first foreign port I went to was Bergen, Norway, and the ship's company, sailors on the ship, told the girls over there in Bergen, they said, "See those guys with blue rims around their hat? That means they have VD."
When did you find out that that's what they were telling you?
Somebody told us that after they got back aboard ship. I don't know if it really happened.
Yeah. After you graduated, did you have any time in between, or did you immediately go in to serve?
I went immediately. My last year at Duke, my last semester, I was asked to make a choice whether to go into large combatant ships, Pacific, small combatant, or large combatant Atlantic, small combatant, subservice, or flight training. And I selected flight training, which meant that I then had to go through other tests, physical and other types of tests, to qualify for flight training. And so I went through flight training and reported immediately after I graduated in January to the Navy.
What year was that?
January 1955. And I reported to Pensacola, Florida. Went through training as an officer. That's the Air University for the Navy. Every Navy and Marine pilot goes through basic flight training at Pensacola. So that's where I reported.
Can you tell me about your training at Pensacola? How long was it? What did they teach you there?
I was in a class called OI 655. OI means Officer Under Instruction. Sixth class of 1955. And we went through basic ground school there. I can't remember exactly how long we were there. I'm kind of embarrassed. I can't remember. But it seems to me it was 6 weeks in Pensacola, but then there are outlying fields. Then I went to Whiting Field, which is really over in Alabama, for where I soloed. Then we went to Softly Field for formation flying. We went to, forgotten the other field there, for instrument training. And Barron Field over in Alabama for carrier qualifications, we call it FCLP, Field Carrier Landing Practice, to learn to land on aircraft carriers.
Was most of your training at Pensacola in the classroom or in aircraft, or 50-50?
In Pensacola itself, the main base was ground school. But all the flying was in the outlying fields. They had 4 or 5 outlying fields, like basic flight training. And we had ground school, too, at Whiting Field, instruments, Barron Field, that's where it was, formation flying at Softly Field, and in carrier qualifications at Barron Field in Alabama. Then we carrier qualified on the... At that time, I qualified in the Gulf there on the USS Shangri-La.
What kind of aircraft did they teach you to fly?
We were flying all that time pretty much the SNJ, we call it Yellow Peril. The Air Force calls it a T-6, but the Navy designation is an SNJ. So we carrier qualified in there. I did some instrument training in the T-28 too. But
what can you tell me about the SNJ as an aircraft?
The SNJ is a tricky plane to land. It's prone to do ground loops, and so you have to be pretty careful. It's a single engine. The students in front and the instructors in the back seat. It's a lot different. Back then, they didn't have a lot of the safety procedures that we have now in military flight training. But, and the instructors were tough. I mean, they would yell at you, they would scream at you, and I mean, and accidents were much more common then than there are now. There were not all the safety procedures. Actually, I was in the period of time when they're transitioning from propeller to jets. So I carrier qualified in prop planes as well as jets. But at that time in basic training was just propeller prop planes. And the SNJ was trained hundreds and thousands of Navy and Marine pilots. And then when we finished that basic training, we were offered a choice to go to advanced training in multi-engine or single-engine aircraft. I elected single-engine. So then I went to Texas for advanced training in jets, single-engine jets. And my other classmates had elected multi-engine. went to Olathe, Kansas for multi-engine training.
Why did you choose the single engine?
That's a good question. I try to tell you in nice terms that I can use in mixed company, but it was, I was a gung-ho guy. I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and that's where the action was. I didn't want to be a bus driver, and I didn't want to, although I really liked instrument flying and all, but I was very gung-ho. I want to be a fighter pilot. I want to be in it where the action was. And I want to do the thrills of being a single-engine pilot, a fighter pilot. So we went to Beeville, Texas. Well, we were for a short time in Corpus Christi, Texas, but the outlying field there, Beeville. And it's right in it's near Kingsville, Texas, where the Big Kings Ranch is down there. And they're still using that field now for single-engine advanced training.
How long were you at Beeville?
That's a good question.
Like weeks,
yeah.
Months?
I think it must have been 2 or 3 months, or maybe 4 or 5 months. I can't remember. But when I finished, I was commissioned that time.
What did they train you on in Beeville? Did you go
I
to different
flew,
aircraft?
Yeah, I flew the first jets I flew was a TV, which is as you could say, F-80 Shooting Star used to be the name. It was a 2-place jet trainer. And then I transitioned into the F9F2, F9F5 Panther, which is a straight-wing single-engine jet. And that was the last plane that I finished my training in and was designated, got my wings there, my Navy wings of gold, and designated as a naval aviator.
Wow. Did you have a graduation ceremony?
Yes, yeah. But my family, I didn't have a family there. My mother was still in North Carolina. That was the only, and I had a brother who was an engineer working in North Carolina. So I was, and I can't even remember who pinned the wings on me. I guess the commanding officer, whoever was the big honcho there. I think the commanding officer of the Naval Training Command.
Once you graduated from Beeville, got your wings, where did you go next?
I was assigned to a fighter squadron in California, it's near San Diego, VF-122. VF means fighter squadron. 122 at NAS Miramar, Naval Air Station Miramar, just outside San Diego. So I reported there in June of 56. May of 56, I reported to Miramar. I'd never been on the East Coast before. That was a big world, a whole world of difference
The
to
West
me.
Coast.
The West Coast, excuse me, yeah. I grew up on the East Coast and went to school and served in my tours, my cruises in the East Coast. But that was my first view of the West Coast.
What was your impression?
I still remember driving to Miramar, and I remember seeing the date trees and the palm trees. I was a little country boy from North Carolina, and it was a different world to see palm trees around there. But beautiful. San Diego is a beautiful area. It's like Hawaii. It's a Hawaiian climate in this country. So it was a beautiful country. A good flying weather there, too.
How long were you at Miramar and what were your duties there?
Okay, I was an ensign then, and when I got to the squadron, I didn't know anyone. The squadron at that time had about 25 pilots and about 14 planes. At that time, Miramar was a new base on the outskirts of San Diego. It was sort of out in the country. Since then, it's grown up, and now they don't use it. It's been changed to a Marine base now. But at that time, we lived in Quonset huts. I remember when I first got there, we were building a BOQ, the Bachelor Officer Quarters. But before that was finished, we lived in Quonset huts. And they had the F-2H Banshee, was a plane that they were flying at the time. It's a twin-engine jet, straight-wing jet. The one that John Glenn was flying a couple of years before that. But we were flying the F-2H Banshee, and then they brought in the F-3H, which I have a model of upstairs. I could show you if you wanted to see it. The planes up, but the F-3H was a long story about the F-3H. It was a heavy single-engine night fighter and all-weather interceptor, high-performance plane for young pilots. We call nuggets for new first tour pilots. It was a heavy plane, a lot of electronic equipment, single engine, big, heavy plane. They used to kid us about, they'd say it was the only fighter plane with a swivel chair in the cockpit. It was so huge. The cockpit was huge.
How big a crew?
Only one. I mean, that's all. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the biggest problems with the F-3H Demon. It was the predecessor to the F-4, which is a workhorse in Vietnam. The F-4, but the F-3 was single engine and had one person, and you were the pilot, the co-pilot, the radar operator, the gunner, the bomb. You were everything. And it was a radar intercept fighter. So that was one of the problems. And they corrected when they built the F-4, they put 2 engines in it, and they had 2 crew. They had a radar intercept officer. But that airplane, I'll tell you, Eileen, every year of my life after age 25 was a gift from God. I lost, at that time, that squadron lost about 6 planes.
How?
Yeah, well, they had compressor stalls. The plane was underpowered for so large and heavy. The plane was a lead sled, really. It had icing problems, compressor stalls, it was underpowered. It was a night fighter. We had to carrier qualified at night. We were the night fighter squadron for the air group on the ship, on the Ticonderoga. I lost my best friend. The only person I knew when I got to VF-122 was a young ensign by the name of Ed Curl. He was killed in El Centro, Texas on a gunnery training flight, March 14th, 1957. My best friend. Killed before we even finished training. And he was killed in El Centro. Later, my roommate was killed in Hawaii. Lieutenant Lee Sessions was killed in May of 57. We had several crashes. Back then, they didn't have all the safety procedures they have now. It was a part of the job. The crashes were expected. You know, a guy screws up and he has an accident or crashes. He bought the farm, you know, and that happens. Since then, there's a lot more safety procedures. Aircraft are a lot more expensive, more complicated, of course, now. But it was sort of expected back then. And we lost, I think, 7 or 8 planes during the training. Some of the pilots bailed out, some didn't. Ed was killed in El Centro before he could even eject. And we had a section flame out. We had it when we were in the South China Sea. That plane, Atlantic Fleet had restricted this Demon from flying in moisture above the freezing level because it would ice up and flame out. But AirPac, Pacific Air Force, had not done that yet. I remember the night that lost Warren Witherstein and Pat Working both went in. They had briefed that night. I remember a dark, stormy night in the South China Sea. And I remember everybody going down to the ready room to see if your name was on the flight schedule. No, I don't think anyone was anxious to fly that night, especially in that plane. And they briefed they knew they were going to have a flame out. They briefed for it. They knew very well when you flame out, the flight leader turns 30 degrees left, you're in the soup, in the clouds. The wingman turns 30 degrees right so they don't collide, and they set up a glide and attempt to get an air start. from the windmilling engine. But neither one was able to get an air start. And so Warren and Pat both went down that night. And the next morning, they found Pat paddling around in his little raft. He put out his dime marker and he did everything right by the book. And the helicopter picked him up, brought him back to the Ticonderoga. Warren Witherstein was never found. Not a trace of him anywhere. They don't know if he ejected or what happened, but he's now at the bottom of the South China Sea. And as a result of that and some other accidents we had, they offloaded our squadron from the carrier because we really had lost all of the intercept capability. They left us in the Philippines, and the ship picked us up there on the way back to the States. And we came back with the ship at the end of the cruise.
All right, so this might be a good time to talk about the difference between flying and landing on ground and landing on a carrier, because you were trained to land on an aircraft carrier, which is a lot different than landing on an airstrip on land. And you said you were on the USS Ticonderoga at the time of the accident. Can you describe how different it is to land on an aircraft carrier versus the ground?
Well, there's no room for error. You have to be exactly precise. You have to follow the procedure. You have to be absolutely correct on your altitude and airspeed. It varies with the weight of the aircraft. And you have to, back then, there was an LSO on the tail of the ship. They call it a landing signal officer with flags. He stood with his hands out and flags who directed you as you came into the approach to the deck. And he could give you corrections, high signal, low signal, or fast. He'd say if you're too fast. The interesting thing about coming aboard a ship, we started like 132 knots. Not 135, not 130, 132, generally, at our weight. And the interesting thing about landing on an aircraft carrier that's a little different than field landing is that you don't control the speed of the plane with the throttle. You control it with the attitude, with the stick. To slow down, you raise the nose a little bit. So you control your speed as you're coming aboard with the attitude of the plane. You control the rate of descent with the throttle. Adding throttle, you can slow the rate of descent. So it's a little different. It's just something you have to practice and be good at. We had to make 6 carrier landings in any type of new aircraft carrier to qualify in that type of aircraft. So it's just a matter of practice, I guess. That's all I can tell you.
Where did you go after Miramar?
Well, after Miramar, we finished the training and our squadron went up to San Francisco Bay Area to NAS Alameda, which is on the eastern side of San Francisco Bay, where we loaded on the Ticonderoga. And we departed there in, 57. I think it was around June of 57, I believe we departed there on the Ticonderoga for Hawaii. We went into Pearl Harbor there, of course, and that's where all of the ships going to Western Pacific go through what they call an operational readiness inspection in Hawaii before you go on out. They call it an ORI. We went through the ORI. That's where my roommate was killed during the ORI, Operational Readiness Inspection, at the Naval Air Station Barbers Point, which is right at the edge of Pearl Harbor there. And
was he on a training flight? Or
no, you simulate operations just like you're in actual carrier combat operations. But he was, that's a long story. He landed short of the runway there. And he had been sent into the runway. For some reason, he couldn't get aboard the ship, and they call him bingoed into the field, and he crashed there just off the runway at Barbers Point. Lee Sessions from Alabama. I've often wondered if he is related to Senator Sessions, who is now in the Senate from Alabama. I would like to, in fact, I even wrote to Senator Sessions' office one time. They didn't reply because I'm not a constituent of his. But I think he may be related to Lee Sessions, who was killed there in Hawaii.
After your ORI, where did you go?
I went out to the West Pacific. We were, that's where we lost a couple more planes. And that's where we were offloaded into the Philippines. Oh, we went to Japan and to Atsugi, Naval Air Station, Atsugi, Japan. We also went into Hong Kong, so I got to see Hong Kong and Japan. And our squadron was in Atsugi Naval Air Station there for about a couple of weeks, I believe.
Did you fly during the day when you were there?
Yeah. We flew out of Atsugi there. The ship was in Yokosuka Naval Air Station, Yokosuka, before we went out into the South China Sea.
And that was still the USS Ticonderoga?
Yep.
Where did you go after that?
Well, we went back aboard the ship when we left Atsugi, and we did operations in the Western Pacific there. There was no actual combat at that time. The Vietnam War really had not started at that time. And but the ship was called down to Indonesia because they thought there was a possibility of a conflict in Indonesia. The ship was sent down there, but we were offloaded because we lost our all-weather capability as the all-weather squadron for that air group, and we were sent to the Philippines. So we spent 3 months. I spent 3 months at the Naval Air Station Cuba Point, the Philippines.
What did you do while you were there? So now you're on land. Yeah,
we're on land. Yeah, we did night fighter. We went to work at 3 in the afternoon and worked till 11 or 12 at night doing combat and all-weather intercept flights, night and all-weather intercept flight. What our mission was to intercept incoming aircraft. And back then, you didn't have as much radar capability as you do now. If the radar picked up incoming aircraft, we were launched. We had our own radar in our plane, which was one of the problems. We had to operate the radar. We had an autopilot for that fighter, which not many fighter planes did. But once we got close enough, our job was to pick up the bogey on our radar and take over and close and launch a missile or whatever we had to do, incoming aircraft. But it was an intercept flight. The radar on the ship or ground just was to get us close enough that we could pick up the unidentified aircraft on our own radar.
After all your practice and landing on aircraft carriers, how did it feel to land on the airfield?
Well, it's a piece of cake. It's very, very good. We did a lot of training around. We've been to a lot of Air Force bases and over the years, and it was a lot different in the Air Force bases. We had huge, long runways, and we used to, the Navy would come right in, bam, right on the end of the runway, and it was a pleasure and much easier, of course, with the long runways. A lot of fun. So we enjoyed going to Air Force bases.
So you were at the Air Force base while you were in the Philippines?
No, that was a Navy base. The Air Force base was up in northern Luzon.
After your time in the Philippines, where did you go?
Well, the ship picked us up, and we went back to California. On the way back, we stopped in Hawaii, and when I was there, I made the decision at that time I was not going to stay in the Navy. on
Why did
active
you
duty.
make that decision?
Well, I figured I wasn't going to be around long if I stayed there. You know, I'd like to have a family, and you know, I'd lost so many friends, and I just, you know, I said I'm going to get all out, and I'll stay in the reserves. But in Hawaii, I took the exam for the graduate school to get my MBA at Stanford. So I took that exam while we were in Hawaii, and when we got back, I finished my tour. I finished my required active duty, and I started graduate school at Stanford Business School in Palo Alto, California, and stayed in the reserves. So I was flying weekends at that time.
What was your commitment as a reservist, and how long did you?
I really didn't have a commitment back then. It was all volunteer. I could stay as long as I wanted to, or I could get out when I wanted to. But I love flying, and so I flew 1 weekend a month at Stanford, and until I graduated, till I got my MBA there.
Where did you fly out of?
Naval Air Station, Oakland, across the bay from San Francisco and across from Palo Alto, where I went to school.
And what were you flying at that time?
We were flying the F-2H Banshee, which I love that airplane. It's a very nice. It was a straight wing jet, but the reserves got sort of cast off from the fleet. It was not a high performance plane like I flew on active duty, but it was a good airplane. Twin engine, 2 little engines in the wing roots, and I like that. I like the Banshee. It was a very forgiving plane, easy to fly, and in fact, we used to go on combat air patrols in the Banshee. We'd go out, take our position, and shut down one engine to preserve fuel, so we could stay out on station longer. We'd actually just shut down an engine and loiter on station until we had received some mission assignment, when we'd light off the engine or light it off to come back in. So I like the Banshee there. So
once you graduated, did you stay in the reserves? What did you do?
Yeah, I received my graduate degree in 1960, and at that time, I came back to North Carolina. I was married. I got married after I got off active duty, and we had a child within the first year. And we decided we'd come back to North Carolina because my wife was from North Carolina. So I went to work for a bank back in North Carolina after I got my MBA.
Did you stay in the reserves?
I stayed in the reserves. I flew out of the Norfolk, Virginia Naval Air Station. I lived near Raleigh, and they used to send a plane out once a month to pick up with about 4 or 5 other pilots in the Raleigh-Durham area. Every Friday, or the Friday evening, we'd all get to the Raleigh-Durham airport, get on the plane, fly into Norfolk, and we'd fly that weekend, and then the plane would bring us back Sunday evening to Raleigh. So I was working for the bank and staying in. At that time, I transitioned to a different plane, S-2F, which is an anti-submarine patrol plane, twin engine, S-2F tracker.
And was that still a fighter plane designed to land on aircraft?
No, it was not a fighter plane. It was an anti-submarine. It was designed as a carrier-based anti-submarine patrol plane. But I never did qualify in it. I was in there flying out of Norfolk in VS 861, which is anti-submarine squadron 861. And that was the squadron I was in when we were recalled to active duty in the Cuban Missile Crisis in October the 1st, 1961.
So why don't you tell me about that? That was a very scary period in American history that most people don't know about.
Absolutely.
You were living and working in North Carolina and a reservist.
Yeah, and flying out of the Naval Air Station Norfolk. Were
you aware of the heated tension between Russia and the United States?
Oh yeah, yes, we were all aware of it. And when we got orders to activate the squadron was activated. It was in big headlines in the paper, especially in the Norfolk area, which is a big Navy area. And they had television cameras came out. They made a big production of recalling this reserve squadron. And the VSH 61, they're recalled for active duty, and they're going to be going to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay. So, and sure enough, we did. We were activated, I think, in June. No, we got a notice in July. Actually, October the 1st, 1961. They activated the Reserve Squadron because my daughter was born 10 days later on October the 10th, 1961. She's a Navy baby, but she was born. My wife we lived in Winston-Salem at the time, working for Wachovia Bank, and she was born in Winston-Salem, but the Navy paid for it, so I always call her my Navy baby. 10 days after we were recalled. So,
what happened once you got your orders? What?
Well, we had to prepare to be deployed to Guantanamo Bay.
What did that entail?
That entailed, we were mainly an anti-submarine squadron, so we were a tracker. Our job was to, we were a hunter-killer, to kill submarines. That was our job. That was our primary mission. We didn't know of submarines in the Cuban area, and I'm not sure there were any. We never found any for sure. We thought we might have found some, but I don't think there were any Russian submarines in the Cuban. So what our mission became once we got down there, and by the way, going down to Guantanamo Bay is a little different than going to anywhere else, because at that time, before you went down there, you had to land down in Florida at Homestead Air Force Base on the southern tip of Florida. And you had to be briefed before you went into Cuba. It was you could not overfly the island. You had to fly out into the Caribbean and then come south through the Windward Passage between Cuba and Haiti and come up below Cuba up into the Naval Air Station at Guantanamo Bay. And so they're very careful about. And everybody knew the Russians were bringing missiles into Cuba. Our job was to fly patrol flights in, really, to monitor Russian ships coming in, to identify them, course, speed. We flew low and slow. We actually flew around the stern and copied down the Russian names off the stern of the ships, and we photographed them, and we tracked. And when we came back in, of course, we were debriefed from our patrol flights, and so the U.S. knew every Russian ship coming into Havana. We knew the name, we knew the course and speed, we knew whether it was fully loaded. We actually saw pictures of the missiles on the deck under the tarps. So we knew they were bringing those missiles into Cuba. And I don't know to this day, really, if people realized, well, that we knew there were missiles there, and the Air Force was overflying. They got some pictures of missile sites. But sometimes I think that's a part of our history that's neglected, because those Russian missiles were 90 miles south of Havana, and they were aimed at the East Coast. They could hit cities on the East Coast right out of Cuba.
What were you thinking? Because now you're actually seeing this. The rest of the American people didn't know this. You're seeing it with your own two eyes. What were you thinking?
Well, we're doing our job. Our job was just to make sure we tracked every Russian ship coming in there, so we could report to the, what was coming in there, and that's basically. At that time, then Castro cut off the water to the Navy base. That's a huge base at Guantanamo Bay. It's got two airfields there, one on each side of the bay. And he cut off the water supply to the Naval Air Station, to the whole Navy base at Guantanamo Bay. And I did have a chance to ride around. They patrolled the perimeter of the base by helicopter. The Marines did all the way around that huge base. And I had a chance to ride around the helicopters and see the Cuban gun emplacements outside the base, overlooking the airfield. And we never knew when they were going to, start lobbing artillery in. And there was one time there when we really expected them to fire on the base. I remember going down one night and starting our planes and dispersing them on the mat so they wouldn't be in a group close together where they could all be hit at the same time. We spread them all out. But there were no shots were ever fired there.
How many planes did we have at that base?
Oh, that's a good question.
Are we
I
talking
really
a
don't
dozen,
know.
or are we talking hundreds?
Our squadron was there for, our squadron had, I think we had about 14 planes in our squadron. But they activated other reserve squadrons on the East Coast. So we were down there for, I think it was 2 months. I remember we were down there Christmas of 1961. We celebrated Christmas down there. And then we were relieved with another reserve squadron in January of 62. So there were reserve squadrons were relieving each other. You'd go down there for, I believe it was either 6 weeks or 2 months that we were there.
So you missed your daughter's birth and Christmas that year?
Yeah.
What effect did it have on the base when Castro turned the water off?
Well, they built a desalinization plant down there, so they became independent. They could create their own water supply by desalinizing seawater, and so I don't remember exactly when that happened, but eventually I know that did happen. So they were not dependent on water from Cuba. Oh.
When you returned home in January of 62, so now are you back on reserve duty? Were you deactivated?
Well, we were taken off active duty, but we were activated for 1 year, October the 1st of 61. So I was in there from 61 to 62, October 62. But we were only in Cuba for, I think it was 2 months. We were down there because other squadrons relieved us.
What did you do for the rest of that year?
Did training flights out of Norfolk, Naval Air Station, Norfolk. And Anti-Submarine was our mission. We went to schools for anti-submarine warfare. We tracked we tracked subs mostly with sonar buoys. You'd track a sub by dropping a circle of sonar buoys and listening to determine the sub's course. And we had a magnetic, they call it MAD, magnetic airborne detection. So we would fly very low over the water with a big stinger out the back of the plane and detect the magnetic anomaly when you passed over the submarine. So we could locate the submarines to a depth of maybe I think they had maximum depth at that time around 600 feet. But we could detect them with magnetic airborne detection. We did a lot of that.
Did you ever detect any subs?
Oh yeah. We tapped them. We dropped little PDCs on practice depth charges on them. Yeah, that was a part of the our training. Yeah, we worked with subs out of Norfolk, and we did summer cruises. We did up in Brunswick Naval Air Station, Maine, Willow Grove Naval Air Station outside of Philadelphia one summer. Down in Florida, Jacksonville Naval Air Station, at Guantanamo Bay, several summers we were down there. Because I was in until 76. I finished my 21 years, 1970. But every summer we go to different places.
All right, so your activation was October 1 of 61 for a year. Then you stayed, once they deactivated you, you stayed in the reserves until 1976?
Yeah. I went back to working my job at the bank, Wachovia Bank in Raleigh, North Carolina, and continued my Navy Reserve. By that time, I guess I'd had 55, about 7 or 8 years total service at that time. So I stayed in and enjoyed the fun. Were you still flying
airplanes in the 76?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think 75 was the last time I was flying S2. We transitioned in the early 70s from the S2F to the P2V, which is a long-range land-based patrol plane, P-2V Neptune. It was a twin-engine plane and also had 2 jet engines, 2 jet pods and 2 reciprocating engines. It's kind of a unique. We had 2 turning and 2 burning.
And what was the purpose of this plane?
It was a long-range patrol plane. Anti-submarine patrol plane, still. But it was land-based.
So when you flew that one, you flew out of...
At that time, I flew out of Norfolk, and then I went to work up in New York, so I transitioned to the Floyd Bennett Field. Flew out of Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn. New York, for a while, and then that base was decommissioned. Our squadron was transferred down to Willow Grove Naval Air Station outside Philadelphia. That's where I transitioned. Was just beginning to transition into the P-3 Orion when I completed my active duty and I completed my reserve duty. Excuse me, and got out in '76.
After you stayed in all those years, what made you leave in 1976?
Well, I had my 21 years in, and I was driving at that time. I was working for a bank in New York State, and I was driving one weekend a month all the way down to Philadelphia. And it just wasn't that, I wasn't really thrilled with the P-3 Orion. I felt like I was a bus driver. So I got out. I just completed my duty. That was it.
Wow. When you were on active duty, what were your living conditions like? And I'm sure it was different when you were in Miramar versus Guantanamo Bay. When you were at, say, Miramar or Hawaii, did you live on the aircraft carrier? Did you live on shore in barracks?
Well, in Miramar, we lived in the BOQ once it was completed. We first got there in Quonset huts, but then once a new BOQ was built, we lived there. I was single that time, and of course, when we deployed, we lived on the ship, and in the Philippines, we lived at the Naval Air Station Cuba Point, and then in the BOQ there. But aboard ship, the living conditions were, I thought, very good. There's not a lot of space, but I mean, the food was good, and our duties were just mainly flying. We didn't have a lot of administrative duties, so that's.
Were there ever any shortages? Did you always have enough supplies and equipment?
We did. We had the only thing with that, the aircraft we had required an awful lot of ground maintenance per flight hour because of the electronic equipment, because of the problems with the engine, the compressor stalls we had in the engine, the icing in the inlet ducts, the compressor stalls, and there were problems with the plane. But I mean, that was one reason I think the Navy didn't really buy a lot of those planes. They were just not working out. McDonnell Aircraft built those planes down in St. Louis, and then they learned from the F-3, and when they built the F-4, they got a great airplane, and it was used all through Vietnam. I never flew the F-4. I always wish I could. In a twin engine, you had a radar intercept officer behind you, and it was just a whole different world in the F-4. From what my friends tell me, but I never flew it because I was in the reserves at that time, and the reserves didn't get the F-4s. So, we got the F-4s were in the active fleet.
How did you stay in touch with your family when you were on board ship?
We did not have a lot of stuff like they do now. Now, I mean, with all the new electronics, it's like you're just in the next town or something. But we didn't. We had mail, U.S. mail, that's all. They had, they would bring mail to the ship in what they call a COD, C-O-D, carrier onboard delivery, a heavy plane would come and bring the mail in occasionally. And
Not every day.
not every day. I mean, out there it was maybe, I'm just trying to think how often we'd get mail. Maybe, I don't know, it seems like back then, maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe once a month, as I recall. And you'd get letters from home, and you could sit there, would pick up mail, take it out too. So it was a lot different than now.
So how did you hear about your daughter's birth?
Oh, I wasn't on the ship then. I was in Norfolk. She was born 10 days after we were recalled, and my wife actually came up to Norfolk. I had a son. Susan was our second child. And I remember she flew from Winston-Salem up to Norfolk. And I remember there going to the airport to pick her up. She gets off of the plane with this little baby in her arms and another little son by the hand. And I rented an apartment because we were only going to be there a year. We called our squad, activated us for a year. And she got off the plane carrying Susan and leading Charley by the hand. And I took her to an apartment. And so she was there for the year. But the 2 months that we were deployed down to Guantanamo Bay, she went back to Winston-Salem with her, back home with her family.
When you were at Guantanamo Bay, could you stay in touch with your family at that point?
Only by mail. We didn't have any
No
phone. I don't think. I don't know. I remember Christmas of 1961 down there. My wife sent me an electric shaver, the first one I'd ever seen in my life. That was my Christmas present, Christmas 1961, an electric shaver. So down there, that was pretty new in 61.
What was your living conditions like while you were at Guantanamo Bay? Did you have barracks, regular barracks, sleeping quarters?
We had very nice. It's a nice base. We had the bachelor officers' quarters, and we'd been there several times on summer cruises for 2-week cruises before. So we knew our way around, and we knew there's a little bar there in the officers' club, and we knew Rodney, the same bartender, had been there for years. He was an institution. So we'd always see Rodney when we got there.
What did you do for entertainment in your downtime?
In Cuba?
You didn't have any downtime.
Well, yeah, we did have some downtime. Yeah, we did. We played golf. And we're in the Philippines. We played a lot of golf because we were a night fighter squadron, so we worked at night mainly. So we played golf. We played tennis. That's about all. You could go. They had a base movie you could go to sometimes. But that's about it.
What was your opinion of officers that you served with?
They were great guys. They were really great. They were all volunteers. No one was drafted. I mean, they were all there because they wanted to be there. And I really admired some of the more experienced, we call them second tour pilots, who'd been on the cruise before. They were good men. They knew what they were doing. They were very professional. They were experienced. They used to kind of initiate the nuggets that came in the squadron. It was a little bit of, it's like a freshman in high school. You gotta kind of cozy up to these guys, and you have to learn from them. They're good. They're very professional. Excellent pilots. The best pilots in the world. The best trained and the most skillful pilots in the world. In fact, one of my very best friends, Alan Bean, I don't know if that name means anything to you, but he walked on the moon. He and I flew together in Pensacola. And Alan was just a wonderful pilot. He was also an aeronautical engineer from Texas. And after I got out, he stayed in and he went into the astronaut program. And he became an astronaut and actually went to the moon. Walked on the moon. Alan Bean. Yep. But they were good. The pilots they were very professional. Good men. And the thing that surprised me sometimes, I wonder why would these men stay in the Navy? Why? They could have gotten jobs as the airline pilots, making a lot of money and living at home with their families.
So why do you think they did?
I think they were patriotic men. They were patriotic people. They really, really wanted to serve their country. I mean, it may sound corny, but they were real professional. I know a couple Naval Academy graduates, a couple men that had been there. I remember our administrative officer, he got shot down in Korea in a Corsair. And he crashed again in the South Pacific flying in it. So he went down 2 times. And I often wondered, why would a guy like that stay in there? Why? Pat could have gotten out. He could have gotten a job with the airlines. But I think they have a real desire to serve their country.
Now, you were in the United States on the East Coast when the Vietnam War heated up.
Yeah.
In the later 60s.
Yeah.
You were still in the reserves.
Yeah.
Were you in contact with any of the pilots coming home from combat in Vietnam?
Yes, I was. They would get out and they would stay in the reserves and they'd come and be assigned to our reserve squadron, various reserve squadrons. Yeah.
So you were well aware of what was happening over in Vietnam and what it was like for those guys?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of them that were in my reserve squadron were airline pilots. They got jobs with airlines. And a lot of them were airline pilots. I never did that, and sometimes I wonder why I didn't. Back at that time, the airlines were not interested in hiring cowboys. I mean, single engine guys. They wanted people with multi-engine experience. And I really never even applied to the airlines.
Did you ever even consider being an airline pilot?
I did. I could have done when I was I had a chance to go with Hawaiian Airlines, as a matter of fact, and I probably, looking back, it might have been fun to do that. But when I was in school in California, I had a chance to do that in the summer, one summer. But I didn't do it, and sometimes I wondered. But hey, you make your choices in life, and.
Did you make any close friendships while you were in the service all those years?
Oh, yeah. Especially with VSH 61, the reserve squadron was recalled, and we spent the time together, a lot of time for probably 7 or 8 years, including the time we were down in Cuba.
Do you stay in touch with any people from?
We used to have some reunions, yeah, but we haven't had one lately because these guys have died off. I mean, I'm 83. And I was one of the younger pilots. So there's not many left. We had one of the guys, John Humber, who actually was on the staff at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He made a cruise book for us. So we kept track of, and he used to keep track of at least the officers. We knew each other there. And John, but he's lost, I don't know whether he got sick or something, and he's older now, and doesn't do that anymore, so I've kind of lost track of them. What happened?
So you did have some reunions? Oh
yeah, we had some reunions in Norfolk. Yep, the Breezy Point Officers Clubs, where we had our reunions, or later on at a motel in the Norfolk area. Yep, had some reunions there. They were good guys.
Hank, how would you say your military experience influenced your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Well, I'll tell you. I learned that war is a horrible thing, and the people who send young men to war sometimes don't understand what they're doing, in my opinion. The politicians do not understand what sacrifices people make in terms of their living sacrifices and giving their lives. I'll tell you, every person who's been on active duty or retired or reserves or National Guard at some point in their life wrote a check payable to the United States of America for an amount up to and including my life. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, especially the politicians that send young men to war. They don't have to go. They're at home. They send these kids out. Fight battles for them.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yes. I'm a member of the American Legion Post 72 here in Southington. In fact, I'm the chaplain for the post. Well, because I attended some funerals, and then I took my best friend home in a box to his family in March of 1957. And I'm a young kid from North Carolina with a southern accent, and I remember I had to go cross country with this escort the casket in the box home to his family near Buffalo, New York, in March of 57. And it was so cold up there. And I had my khaki uniform because I came from San Diego. And I remember getting up there, and the wind came off of Lake Erie, and it was a cold March, and the funeral up there. I'd never seen anything like that. And he was a Catholic. I was a Protestant, so I was really amazed at all of the Catholic ceremony they went through. That had a nice family, a wonderful family, and a very attractive sister who was about my age. If I'd stayed up there longer, I'd gone after her. But nice girl, a nice family. It was so cold up there, and I didn't have my winter uniform. The commanding officer of the Naval Reserve Center in Buffalo let me wear his big overcoat to the funeral. Thank goodness. But that was way before we even...
Well, that must have made quite an impression on you, though, as a young guy.
Yeah. I was a young kid. Yep.
How would you say that your military service affected your life?
Well, I think I'm a patriotic person. I try to be very patriotic. I love my country, but they've treated me well, and they paid for my college education, and I have a very small pension now because I did my 20 years, but it was not that much active duty there. But it made me respect the military probably a lot more. I have a lot of respect for, especially career people in the Navy. A lot of respect for them.
Hank, are there any other memorable experience or incidents that you can recall that I haven't asked you about?
I think you covered.
You'll think of it after I leave.
Pretty much, probably will after you leave, but I think you covered pretty much. You gave me a chance to. I mean, I could tell some specific stories and things like that, but some of them you don't want. Some of them you don't want to hear about.
What specific incidents can you recall?
Oh, I recall a dark, stormy night out in the South China Sea when we launched the two planes. We knew we were going to have a flame out. And I'd say thank God that my name wasn't on the flight schedule. But we were ready to go. I was ready to go. And the two guys that went flamed out.
Have a flame out? How did you know?
Because the Atlantic Fleet had already restricted this F-3H Demon from flying in visible moisture above the freezing level. They restricted because the engines would get compressor stalls and icing, and would flame out. And
those two
we
aircraft knew.
Oh yeah, they briefed for it. Well, then you put it together. They didn't know absolutely it was going to happen, but it had happened in the Atlantic Fleet, and it happened with other planes in air pack. And the chances are very high, great probability that they would, and they briefed for it. They planned, and
well, so if your name had been on the list and you were flying out,
I wouldn't be here today. If that might.
When you left in that aircraft, you would be planning on that? You might not be coming back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I probably wouldn't be here today. That's the reason I say, and that was just that one incident. There are other incidents, too. I could tell you several others, but yeah, I wouldn't be here today. Every day that I live after age 25 is a gift from God, as far as I'm concerned, you know. My number didn't come up, that's all. Your number comes up, you go. You have to go. Did you see the movie? I don't know if you saw the movie Bridges of Toko-Ri with Bill Holden, but that gives a good picture of the jets off of aircraft carriers in the Korean War. Bridges at Toko-Ri with Bill Holden.
Any other memorable incidents?
You covered most of them, Eileen, I think. I mean, I don't know how much you want to go into, but I miss the guys I flew. It was a big transition for me when I got off active duty the first time. I no longer was flying high-performance jets. It came to a point in my life where your self-identity changed. You're not the same person anymore. You're no longer a jet fighter pilot. That is a huge mental transition, you know.
And how did you adjust to that?
Well, fortunately, I went to graduate school, went back to graduate school, got my MBA. It was a complete change, but it's a different identity. You're not the person you used to be. It's a whole different. Flying is something it gets into your blood, and it's there's nothing else like it anywhere else.
Do you have any regrets?
I have no regrets. No. I have no regrets.
Well, Hank, I'd like to thank you for sharing your story with me, and thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.